Beauty trends are always changing and evolving, for better or for worse. Welcome back to Bumblebee. I'm your stand-in host Dayna, and this is the top 10 unusual vintage beauty trends that make no sense. Coming in at number 10, we have having a pale complexion. Beauty comes in every skin shade, but in the Victoria era, the paler you were better and considered more beautiful. Women would often wear layers of light creams and white powders in order to look even paler, and they would already wear a red lip and try and have a dainty form. This was described as the tuberculosis look, which already sounds really concerning, and frankly, it was. A lot of different makeup they had was making women ill because of the contents in it, and apparently, the men at the time were into that. They romanticized the fever-heavy eyes, which were large and deep, and the fragile nature of a sick woman, and was compared to that of a porcelain doll. And they lost weight due to the illness. It was considered the ideal form. It makes no sense because who would want to idealize becoming terminally ill just to attract a man? That's all different kinds of wrong. At number 9, we have beauty marks. Something else that ran rampant amongst the wealthy upper class was a bodily contracted disease that would leave giant welts and open wounds all over the body, and the face in particular. While most of these marks could be covered with clothing, they had to get a little more creative when they were on the face. So the wealthy victims would create beauty marks out of velvet or moleskin, which would be adhered to the face using different types of sticky substances, one of which being an animal fat paste used in other cosmetics. The amount of foam marks one had could also determine their social status or even mood and intentions. While beauty marks symbolize different things in different cultural eras, they were simply a form of status and a clever disguise. Of course, ignoring the growing wound underneath these often led to a fashionable end, so it made sense to hide them, but didn't make sense to make it a fashion trend. At number 8, we have Galdiator sweat cream. Those words really should not be used in a sentence together, because it is exactly as gross as it sounds. In ancient Rome, gladiators were a big deal. We know this. But something that became very popular was harvesting the sweat of a successful champion and turning into a cream or even an edible butter or paste. For the creams, the sweat would be scraped off the champion using a tool called a striggle and would be put into tiny glass vials. Women of the time would then use it as a face cream because it was supposed to help maintain youth and improve their complexions. Now, it wasn't just used by itself, but it was often mixed with olive oil. The other purpose was as an aphrodisiac, meaning they would use the runoff to hopefully get it on. They would often use a small amount mixed with wine in order to set the mood. Neither of these makes any sense, but it is enough to make anyone cringe. At number 7, we have lead green everything. The color green is everywhere. It's in the trees, the grass, the plants, and so many other wonderful things around us. Well, in the 17th century, it was the cause of thousands of fatalities. In Sweden in 1775, a man named Carl Wilhelm Scheele created a shade of green that was mesmerizing and made with a toxic chemical called arsenite that was particularly lethal. Well, that particular shade of green was used in everything from paper to children's toys to wall painting and clothing. Green took over the fashion world and came with the cost of becoming incredibly ill. However, in the 19th century, Scheele's green was replaced with Paris green, and that was also highly toxic and was used by a lot of famous painters who ended up having lifelong illnesses. For example, Monet, who went blind after being overly exposed to the paint. Now imagine that pigment in eyeshadows or in a garment of clothing. It was equally as fatal. Thankfully for modern society, both shades of green were banned in the 1960s. At number 6, we have visible veins and high hair. To add to the tuberculosis look, having bulging blue veins was apparently an attractive feature as well, but it deserved its own point because of how obscure it is. In pre-revolutionized France, while Marie Antoinette was still ruling, she and her merry band of nobles would make themselves pale, like we knew, and use a blue pencil in order to accentuate the veins to give the illusion of being even paler than she already was. The veins were on the arms, the neck, and the chest area, and any other vein that was slightly visible was made prominent. She also made big hair, well, big. The bigger the hair, the higher the status. So they would wear large wigs styled with lard in order to appear more regal, when in reality rats and mice would often make their homes in these hairpieces because they were attracted to said lard. Neither of these trends make sense, and it sounds like they were incredibly gross and inconvenient. At number 5, we have the creation of codpieces. So a codpiece is essentially a garment of interesting clothing that was used to cover a man's bits when he didn't want to wear a shirt long enough, or pants with any breathing breathing room. This style was on and off in popularity throughout England and Europe. In the 14th century, extremely tight leggings and short tunics became more and more popular, and men were not scared to give everyone a show. Well, as religion began to gain traction, people who followed were starting to get angry and uncomfortable with the style, seeing as it was deemed immoral. Hence the creation of the codpiece, which became popular as well. They were made out of many different materials like velvet, cotton, and silk, and were often embroidered and bedazzled. Some of these things would also be made into armor pieces as well. While the fashion trend itself doesn't make sense, at least it made people decent. At number 4, we have extremely long nails. In today's world, it's easy to have long nails. You can go to places to get fake ones, and there are different serums and growth oils to help maintain long and healthy nails. In ancient China, you were considered royal or noble if you had long and relatively healthy nails. Having long nails symbolizes not having to do any hard labor that requires working with one's hands. It also symbolized having superior body health because of the amount of nutrition required to maintain nails. Another thing that played a part in nobles having long nails was not wanting to harm or change one's physical body, because if you were chosen to have a healthy body, it was meant to be protected. Because nails were considered precious, royals would often wear what was basically finger armor in order to protect them. They were also decorated in jade and other precious stones to enhance the look of finger guards. While it was a very bizarre fashion trend, it does make sense in the grand scheme of things. Anyone with long nails knows how much it hurts to break one. At number 3, we have the baby look. Things we as a society are self-conscious about today were considered high beauty standards in the medieval era. For example, having a big forehead, having little to no eyebrows, or having no eyelashes. These things were deemed extremely attractive by men of that era. These practices were introduced in order to be perceived as pure as possible, because lacking facial and head hair was deemed pure and youthful, like cherubs and children. Because what's more pure than a child or an angel? It even got to a point where body hair in general was frowned upon, which included facial hair of any sort. Eyelashes and eyebrows would be removed by plucking, but foreheads were often shaved bald rather than plucked, so at least it would be less painful and far less tedious. And while there was a comeback of tiny eyebrows in the 90s, it was nothing close to having them removed entirely. Not only does this trend make little sense, but we are so happy it was left in the past. At number 2, we have the unibrow. In a complete turn of events from the last point, unibrows were extremely popular in ancient Greece. A unibrow is something a lot of people avoid in today's world because it's deemed unattractive, but in ancient Greece, it was one of the most beautiful facial features on a person, women particularly. If a woman could not grow a natural eyebrow, she would use goat hair that was dyed black and would use tree resin and sap to attach it to her face. And wealthier women would simply paint it on. This was considered a beauty trend because it signified purity and intelligence, seeing as most men of the time could grow natural unibrows, which influenced the way women made themselves appear. Another common theme amongst women in ancient Greece was cutting their hair short in order to appear more masculine to attract men. It doesn't really make sense, but as long as you're happy with how you look, right? And last but not least, at number 1, we have having small feet, also known as foot binding. It was a beauty trend that began in the 13th century and originated in China. Feet of young girls were bound by different fabrics in order to stop them from growing properly, and they would often fold the bones of the toes inward to grow incorrectly and be permanently smaller. The ideal bride was supposed to have a foot as small as 3 inches. The average foot length in North America is 6.5, which is just over 9 inches in length. This was so that they could achieve a look called the lotus foot, to fit into the lotus shoe, which was incredibly intricate and tiny. The higher the status of a woman, the smaller her feet were, which was essentially the mindset, because having large feet as a woman was considered embarrassing. Well, because of this, they would often be unable to walk and would have immense pain throughout the foot more often than not. So not only did the trend not make any sense, it was extremely painful, and it wasn't even banned until 1949. And those have been the top 10 vintage beauty trends that make no sense. If you enjoyed the video, you can leave a like or a comment down below, and if you're looking for more interesting history videos, you should follow the channel. I have been your stand-in host Dayna, and thank you so much for tuning in to Bumblebee.